Hello, I'm Pete Nenny, representative of the Daily Herald editorial board. Today is September the 9th, and we're pleased to begin a joint interview with candidates for Lake County State's Attorney in the November 2020 election. I'm here with editorial board member Diane Dungy and Daily Herald reporter Eric Peterson. We welcome the candidates, incumbent Michael Nerheim and his Democratic opponent Eric Rinehart. Mr. Nerheim, we'll begin our questioning with you. What differentiates you from your opponent? How would you describe yourself to voters?
So I think certainly, what differentiates me from my opponent is my experience. I've been both a criminal defense attorney and a prosecutor. I started my career in the state's attorney's office. Prior to that, I did 5 internships in the office as I was going to law school while growing up here in Waukegan. So I've done every job just about that there is to do in the state's attorney's office, which is important because if you're going to run the 3rd biggest prosecutor's office in the state of Illinois and one of the biggest in the country, you really need to have experience as a prosecutor. I've also, as I said, I've also been a criminal defense attorney, which I think is also important because as a prosecutor, our job is to seek justice, not merely convictions. And having that perspective of somebody that's represented people charged with crimes, both as a private attorney and people that are indigent that are charged with crimes, that gives me, I think, a unique perspective that allows me to do my job effectively. What I would want voters to know about me is that while I am a Republican, this is a partisan race. My job is not at all political. This job is not political. My office is not political. When it comes to making charging decisions and decisions on cases, we look at the facts, we look at the law, and we make appropriate decisions based only on those 2 factors and nothing else.
Mr. Rinehart, same question. What differentiates you from your opponent? How would you describe yourself to voters?
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you again for this opportunity. I think the difference between me and my opponent is that I represent real change. We need to focus on the problems in Lake County, the problems that have been affecting this county and the families and communities in this county for 8 years. And I represent a change. The violent crime rate is up in Lake County. That needs to change. We have not ever gotten away from our wrongful conviction past, and I can talk more about that. That needs to change. We need to expand our treatment programs. We need to be getting more help to people while also recognizing that violent crime continues to be a problem in this county. In the last 48 hours, there have been shootings in both North Chicago and Waukegan that have killed people, and that needs to change. And so I think what differentiates me from my opponent is that I represent change and urgency, and these problems are urgent. When it comes to my experience, when it comes to who I am, I've been an attorney in Lake County almost exclusively. I wish I could say 100% because it's just easier at this point, but probably 95% in Lake County. But I've also seen how other courtrooms and other counties work and don't work in that smaller percentage. I went to the University of Chicago Law School in 2001, worked at a top civil law firm for 2 years where I learned attention to detail. Being a young associate in a Chicago law firm is like no experience that I can compare it to. Where I learned attention to detail and the importance of hard work and good lawyering. After that, I went to the public defender's office and have been a criminal defense lawyer working in this courthouse for 18 years and seeing up close the changes that we need to make desperately and urgently in this county and in this courthouse.
Mr. Rinehart, why should people vote for you?
Well, it's similar to the answer I just gave. I represent change, and I'm going to represent a new focus. We have to prioritize focusing on violent crime. We have to actually move resources from nonviolent cases in terms of courthouse and investigative resources to fighting violent crime. The murder and sexual assault rate is up in Lake County. That needs to be turned around. We need to turn around the domestic violence epidemic, and I recently put out my domestic violence plan. I think it was maybe last night or this morning. We need to get control on that. I intend to have a task force that focuses on both violent crimes and domestic violence. I think that would be maybe separate task force. But we need to make that priority number one. And we need to make sure that we are fighting violent crime in all of our communities. and that we aren't just focusing on some privileged communities, but that all communities feel like the state's attorney's office is fighting for them. People should vote for me because I'm a fighter. I've been a fighter for my clients for 18 years, and I'm going to fight for every single resident of Lake County in reducing violent crime, in increasing our treatment programs. I can talk more about that later if you'd like, and also on finally ending our history of wrongful convictions and bringing real transparency to this office so that we can understand what's going on in this office, and more importantly, so that we can understand the crime trends in this county so that we can react effectively to growing crime trends. And that hasn't happened in the state's attorney's office in the last 8 years, or frankly, in the 18 years that I've been practicing in Lake County. We've never seen a focus on transparency with crime trends. We've never seen a focus on transparency with understanding the operations of the office. And we've never seen a transparency that focuses on understanding the mistakes that police have made. So those are the 3 areas of transparency I want to focus on, along with the other things. People should vote for me if they want their state's attorney's office to do better.
Mr. Nerheim, same question. Why should people vote for you?
So, it's easy to say things and to talk about issues in terms of violent crime, which of course I've addressed and I've worked very hard on in my career as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney. I've been a lawyer for 20 years here in Lake County exclusively. But I actually have a record of not only saying things I'm going to do, but also actually doing those things. I agree violent crime is a priority. Violent crime is up here. It's up everywhere in the country due to a lot of factors. One of the main concerns I have is spillover from Chicago and Cook County's gun violence. There were 51 shootings and 10 murders this past weekend in Chicago. We did have violence here in our community, and that has to continue to be addressed, which is why I've shifted resources in my office to focus on violent crime and crimes of sexual assault. Our Children's Advocacy Center and our Domestic Violence Unit, our Specialized Victims Unit, our Gang and Narcotics Unit, our Cyber Unit, these are units that I've created to focus exclusively on these various types of crime. Our Specialized Victims Unit, for example, which handles crimes of sexual assault against adults and children, has more people dedicated to that unit than ever before in the history of our office. That's where our focus has been and will continue to be. Specialized treatment courts have also been a focus. Not only have we improved the treatment courts that were existing before I took office, but we've added additional programs, both pre and post arrest, to try to divert people away from the criminal justice system and into help. And with respect to wrongful convictions, certainly that's another issue. I'm proud of the track record that my office has. When I took over the state's attorney's office in 2012, Lake County had a history because of cases that had happened prior to that of having issues with wrongful convictions. I came in, I started revolutionary programs, and now Lake County has a reputation of effectively addressing those. We've worked to identify past wrongs. There's been 4 people that my case review panel has identified that I've exonerated. But in addition to freeing those that have been wrongfully convicted, a big part of this review process is to find out how these cases happen in the first place, find out what mistakes were made, and then put protocols into place to make sure they don't happen again. One of the things we're working on and we have been working on is a concept called Sentinel review, which the premise is that wrongful conviction should not happen. It's modeled after the NTSB. When an airline crashes, the premise is that if all is working properly, airliners should not crash. We all know when that does happen, the response is swift, and the authorities literally piece together the fuselage of the crashed plane to try to identify how that happened, what went wrong, and then make sure it doesn't happen again. And that's what we do. We take apart these cases, we find out what went wrong and where, and we put practices and training and protocols into place to make sure they don't happen again. So again, people should vote for me because unlike most people that run for office that say they're going to do things, I've actually done everything and more that I said I was going to do. I have a track record of doing what I say I'm going to do, and I hope to continue to do that as state's attorney for another 4 years.
Mr. Nerheim, what do you see as the greatest need facing the state's attorney's office, and what specific project or plan will you advocate to address that issue?
So I think there's a couple challenges, and one of them certainly has to do with COVID and the impact that the pandemic has had on the county's budget. Lake County is projecting about a $50 million budget shortfall and that's certainly going to trickle down to all the county departments. We are going to have to, moving into the future, we are going to have to continue to do more with less. I'm proud of my record running the office from a financial standpoint. I've come in under budget every year. Last year, I turned in over $700,000 back to the county that I didn't spend. So that fiscal responsibility is a big part of how I've operated my budget. We currently have 7 positions in our office that are vacant, that we're keeping vacant. In the event that layoffs are going to happen, we certainly want to make sure that we're not laying people off, but that we can continue to do our mission with the limited resources that we're going to continue to have. And in my experience in running a budget of over $15 million at this point, which 95+% of that budget goes to staff and salaries, that's the challenge, especially as we move forward into COVID. The other challenge certainly is going to be as it relates to continuing to push back on violent crime spillover that's flooding into our community from neighboring Cook County. The drug epidemic continues to surge. A lot of that is happening around the country, but certainly as it relates to COVID, with treatment providers being closed and resources being limited. The other project, and a specific project that I have moving forward, deals with people that penetrate into the criminal justice system because of mental illness. Certainly we have wonderful programs that focus on people that are struggling with addiction issues. But Illinois lacks, and we're one of the worst states in the country in how we care for people that are struggling with mental illness. The result of that is many of those folks find themselves wrapped up in our criminal justice system. We need to change that. Certainly we have veterans court, drug court, mental health court. These are programs designed to help people after they've come into the system, which is great. But what we need to do a better job of is diverting those folks away from the system in the first place. So the specific project that we've been working on to combat that is a crisis center, a triage center that will be located in Lake County, centrally located. It will be a physical place staffed with trained professionals. So when law enforcement now encounters people that struggle with mental illness or substance abuse or homelessness, they'll have a place that they can take those people. That's not the jail, that's not an emergency room, but a place where treatment providers are located, where resources can be identified, and these folks can get help before ever penetrating into the criminal justice system. So that's a program we've been working on for many years with a lot of our partners here in Lake County. Very close to having that accomplished. We've identified funding sources and actually looking at a specific facility. So more to come on that, but that's a project that will really help a lot of people in Lake County, because when you look at the numbers, a lot of people that end up in the system struggle with mental illness or substance abuse, or a combination of both of those things. And if we could do more to divert those people away from the system before they're ever arrested, we're all going to be better off.
Mr. Rinehart, what do you see as the greatest need facing the state's attorney's office, and what specific project or plan will you advocate to address that issue?
We have to restore the trust again between the people and the courthouse, between the people and the state's attorney's office. I've got to respond to Mike's last point, or a couple points ago, about the wrongful conviction unit. I just disagree with him. He's saying that he's done the things he promised to do, and then saying, unlike other people running for office, I've never run for office before. So he's certainly not talking about me. And when he says that he has done these things, I've been practicing here the whole time that Mike has been the state's attorney, and it's just not true. The same prosecutors who worked on Jerry Hobbs and Juan Rivera are still in that office. As a matter of fact, the prosecutor who worked on Hobbs and Rivera is the #2 person in that office. When Mike is working on other things and he is not in the courthouse, that prosecutor is the person supervising young attorneys and old attorneys. That prosecutor is watching trials and meeting in the conference rooms. That prosecutor Jeff Pavletic is the #2 prosecutor in this county today, and was during the Hobbs matter, and was during the Rivera matter. The same detectives who took a coerced confession from Jerry Hobbs continue to bring cases into this courthouse. So Mike has talked a lot about changing it, but I believe that the handbook that the state's attorney's office has not changed. Whether there's training or not, we don't know. Whether there is transparency about this or not, we don't know. We don't know the names of the case review panel. We don't know the cases that they're working on. Mike has talked about the 4 people that the panel exonerated in 8 years. And at least 2 of those, because I'm just going from public reports, I don't have any public transparency information on that. At least 2 of those gentlemen already had their appeals in the system. Strong and Carini were already appealing their cases when Mike took over. So he looked at the appeals that the other lawyers had worked on, and he took action on pending appeals. That's different than rooting out a culture that has put innocent men behind bars and representing a clear break from the past and saying we will actually have change rather than talking about change. Mike has talked about something he calls a citizens advisory panel. He said that he made that promise. The citizens advisory panel, they're not meeting in public. We don't know who their names are. Mike talks about how that should be a conduit between the people and the citizens and his office. The people can't talk to those members of the Citizens Review Panel if they don't know their names, if it's not public hearings. So restoring this link is vital. The other way we can restore this link is by publishing real crime statistics. Mike has had 8 years, and the technology is about as simple as an Excel spreadsheet. We should know what the crime trends are. Domestic violence probably, by all accounts, went up during the quarantine. There should be something on the state's attorney's dashboard that talks about that so we can treat it. If DUIs went up during the quarantine, we need to know it. Both domestic violence and DUIs are public safety issues. So having transparent data, which is about as simple as the Excel spreadsheet, will be a top priority. The second priority is to get back to the violent crimes. He talked about creating divisions. I'm not talking about rechanging divisions. I encourage every member of this panel, if they get a chance, it's easy with Zoom, go watch a courtroom. Go watch a courtroom in this county and see how much actually happens in a case. Now, COVID actually makes it a little more complicated to understand, but it would have been the same if you'd watched it before COVID. Lawyers sit there and report information to judges, and then they get a continuance. And it goes on and on and on. When I'm state's attorney, those attorneys are going to be in the field, meeting with victims, meeting with police officers, going to crime labs more than the 2 weeks before a huge trial. We're going to be at the crime labs. We're going to be meeting with victims where they need to meet with us. We're not going to ask victims to take off time from work and from school. We're going to go meet with them where they want. We're going to have our state's attorneys in the field helping people. That's how you treat violent crime. You also need a real plan to treat violent crime, which is to continue to work with the community leaders. During this campaign and before, I've been talking with ministers, community leaders, violence interrupters about how we get into the streets and reduce the number of gun deaths. And Mike can talk about spillover from Chicago. We got to stop the deaths in the streets. We got to stop it. And it doesn't matter where the person was born. Why is the crime happening up here? Why are there guns happening up here? We need to get the prosecutors out of the courtroom. We need to get a meeting with police officers. We need to have more intelligent investigations. And we need to have violence interrupters in our street that are actually meeting with people in an attempt to reduce the crime. That's what we need to do to protect people.
Mike, would you like to respond?
Well, certainly. I mean, this shows a lack of experience in knowing what it means to be a prosecutor. My staff are on the street. They are talking to people. We talk to victims every day. We talk to police officers every day. We're at the crime lab. We don't just sit in a courtroom. Certainly, court is a big part of what we do in our office as prosecutors, but it's not all we do. With COVID, things are different. Court is remote, which presents some challenges, but also some opportunities and efficiencies. But being active in the community is something that's been a part of my life as long as I've been a lawyer and before. That is important, not just for me, but my entire staff. I didn't get active in the community because I decided to run for state's attorney. I've been active ever since I've been state's attorney and before I ever even thought of running for state's attorney. People in the community know me. They know that I'm out there. People know my staff. They know that our staff is out there. We know these trends. We're following these trends. We're acting on them. Certainly, we have in our office, for example, a full-time crime analyst, somebody that all she does is work with our law enforcement partners to identify crime trends and then act upon those. There are initiatives underway right now where we've applied for grant funding to take on gun violence with technology that will allow gunshots that are occurring anywhere in Lake County to be detected and to have law enforcement immediately notified so they can respond immediately. This is technology that's been in place in other communities across the country for a couple of years. We've been working on bringing that technology here to Lake County. Like many things, it revolves around funding, which is why we're seeking grant funding and some other sources of funding to make that a reality. So again, these are things that are easy to talk about, but I've got a record of actually taking them on with real success.
Mr. Rinehart, in your questionnaire, you made a great many proposals, such as upgrading computer technology, increased personnel to end backlog of sex offender and child abuse cases, increased funding for the Child Advocacy Center, increased training for lawyers, expand the number of lawyers assigned to violent sexual crimes, among others. Do you have a cost estimate for these changes and how you'll fund them, especially with the current financial impact and future uncertainty of COVID-19?
So I think that the county board, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little feedback. Everything, can you guys hear me okay? Okay, sorry, I had a weird echo there. So the county board needs to make the budget decisions as they look at all of the important factors that a county does. When violent crime is going up and when there's a backlog in our forensic lab, and just to explain that for a minute, we have a cyber forensic lab. We have, I think, 1.5, currently the state attorney's office has 1.5 people assigned to that forensic lab out of a $15 million budget. The budget, I think they spent $60,000 on computers in the last 5 years. That's not enough. That's not enough if there's a backlog. And that backlog is important because it's delaying justice in our courtrooms. It's delaying prosecutors and judges from being able to understand the evidence against individuals. And that backlog is unacceptable. And so if that costs more money, I'm going to propose that to the county board, because there's nothing more important than the safety of our families or the safety of our children. That's how I feel as a father, and that's how I feel as a member of this community. So I'm aware of the economic issues with respect to COVID. One of my answers to you talked about how there could have been a small furlough that actually would have saved taxpayers some money. So I'm very cognizant of the issues, but in a $15 million budget, we can find more money for more staff on our forensic lab. And I don't have a cost estimate except to say that we should be getting grants for those computer labs. And if that means that we have to move some of our state's attorneys who are toiling in misdemeanor and traffic courtrooms over to focusing on the violent crimes, then that's going to be cost neutral. If we need to get our state's attorneys out of the courtrooms, and I respectfully just disagree with Mike, I'm seeing it every day in the courthouse, and I encourage you to do it. I want you to look at this because what I'm saying is true. Our prosecutors are spending too much time in the courtrooms instead of being in the field. And respectfully, my problem with Mike's answer is he is just saying we're out there, but violent crime is up. He's saying that we're out there and people know it. I mean, that's literally his argument. People know it. Go to the courtrooms. Look and see how long the prosecutors are in the courtrooms dealing with a lot of cases that could be moved much faster than they are right now, so that they can be out talking to witnesses, taking videotape statements of witnesses earlier. That's what they do in other counties. They have the state's attorneys taking the statements, so you don't automatically have this issue of police officers and body cameras, but rather men and women from the prosecutor's office saying, "Hey, I'm here to help. Let's talk about what happened to you," rather than the police. So I think we may have to spend more money on our cyber lab. And if that means that my budget has to be higher and the county board has to look at other priorities, that's fine, because I will advocate for the families and the communities of Lake County to say, county board, when you're making decisions about priorities, and that's what all of this is, right? We're talking about priorities. When you're making decisions about priorities, please consider that the state's attorney is advocating that we spend more money to end the backlog in the lab and compare that to another project. And that's how politics works. That's how government works. That's fine. But I don't think that the state's attorney's office should be saying, well, I got to hold back a little bit here. I don't want to spend any more money, and I'm not going to make this presentation to the county board. When our violent crime rates are going up, and when people are dying in the streets, I'm not sure why Mike's handing back $700,000 to the county board. I'm not sure why he's handing $700,000 back to the county board when judges are saying to his prosecutors, "Why is it taking so long to analyze a cell phone?" I don't think that should be happening.
Mr. Nerheim, Mr. Rinehart has been critical of your office on several levels, many of which he's discussed today, including what he says is inability to address racial bias and profiling, lack of transparency for not publishing local crime data on your website, and having too many prosecutors on court status calls when they could be out in the field talking to victims. How do you answer those criticisms?
Well, I mean, he wouldn't be a very good campaigner if he said I was doing a good job. So, these are all great talking points, but essentially, I'll address these one at a time. So with the court calls, the Zoom court has its benefits. It also has its negatives. It is incredibly inefficient from the standpoint that our staff are sitting online for hours at a day as these court calls are taking place. But as prosecutors, and again, this highlights the inexperience here, as prosecutors, we have a duty to be in court, whether that's in person or on camera or however a court is going to function. We have to adapt as the court system changes, and we have to be there. It's our job. We are presenting these cases. These are our cases. So if court runs long, or if court starts early, or whatever it may be, we're going to be there, and we're going to be there until court's over. Whatever other time we have to do the other important work, whether it's researching cases, whether it's interviewing detectives, interviewing victims, interviewing witnesses, that all gets done too. That's why my staff often find themselves here on weekends preparing for their trials, because that's sometimes the only time they have to get the work done. And that's why I'm proud to have the staff that I have, because they're all dedicated to what they do. With respect to the budget issue, and again, these are wonderful talking points that Eric's mentioning here, but we have to consider the reality. $50 million shortfall. That's going to trickle down to the departments. We've already cut in terms of commodities and contractuals up to 40% of our budget, but my budget, as I said, is over 95% staff. So if you're going to make real cuts, those cuts are going to come by way of staff. So talking about all the great new staff positions that he's going to create, I would love to do that. And if anybody, and I know you've watched him in the past, every year when I go to the county board and submit for our budget, I fight for new positions. The reality, though, is that there's only so much money to go around, and now times are tough, and they're going to be tough for the near future. So to talk about all these great new positions just again shows the lack of experience, lack of reality, and lack of candor. You have to know that you're seeking an office with a huge budget and major budget constraints, and you're going to have to be able to do more with less, which is why what I've shown I've been able to do. These issues with regard to the cyber lab, for example, I have increased the staff at the cyber lab. In fact, one of the positions I was lucky enough to urge the county to fund last year, which they did fund, thankfully, was a new position in our cyber lab. So we actually have 3 people dedicated to our cyber lab in Waukegan. We actually are expanding to have an additional cyber lab where we can analyze cell phones out at our Children's Advocacy Center and do that real time. We have positions dedicated out at our Children's Advocacy Center to cyber, 2 of our investigators. So actually there's 5. And in addition to that, we were able to acquire a canine electronic detection dog, one of the few in the country. We were able to acquire that dog through donations and through grants, so that didn't cost the county any money. I was able to do that with seeking donations, and that dog works with our investigators and investigators around the state and beyond to go after child predators. So, I realize, and I've worked with and under the constraints of our budget, and I know how to get things done with less. For example, we use over $1.5 million a year through grant funding to support our office. We're very aggressive in seeking grants to help with certain positions in our office when we can do that. A lot of these projects, like the gun detection project and some of our cyber projects, these are all done through grants. Through the Children's Advocacy Center, we started a Friends Committee, which is a group of citizens that volunteer to go out and help raise money for projects at the Children's Advocacy Center. These were things that I didn't just sit back and demand the county to fund because I know the reality of the financial situation. I went out, we raised the money, and we funded them ourselves. So when we wanted to increase the capacity of our audio video recording in the interview rooms for children, we raised money and we did that on our own. When I wanted to bring a healing garden to have a peaceful space for children when they come to be interviewed at the center, we raised money and we did that on our own. When I wanted to bring in the services of comfort dogs, 2 of them, to help not only the children that we interview at the Children's Advocacy Center, but also people that were prosecuting, frankly, in our specialty court programs, we went out and we were able to secure donations for both of those dogs without relying on the county to fund those. And lastly, the new program we're working on at our Children's Advocacy Center will make that the gold standard of really the state and probably beyond, which will be to include the services of a medical wing there at the Children's Advocacy Center. Currently, what happens, children come in, they're interviewed forensically, but then they have to go so often to have a physical exam done. And currently that has to happen at a nearby hospital or maybe sometimes a hospital in Chicago. That's incredibly inconvenient for the child and their family, and it's traumatizing. The whole concept of the Children's Advocacy Center is to try to reduce all the trauma that's placed on those children as they go through the criminal justice process. And that's what our center is known for. We are a model in terms of our policies and our practices at the center. Our caseload has increased significantly, and that's not because these issues are increasing ever more. These are because more and more children are feeling comfortable and underreported. And that's a result of the outreach that we do in our community, which is very real. Back to the medical component, that's also something that we did work with the county through some capital funding to help support that. And we've also worked with the state of Illinois through capital fund. Experience of running a $15+ million budget and a staff of close to 140 people. And currently under the constraints that we're going to face now and into the near future as a result of COVID.
Mike, I think you're first on this one here. What concrete gains can you point to in your administration's battle against wrongful convictions?
So there's 4 people walking free today that would otherwise be in prison if it weren't for me. You know, I know Eric mentions, well, we have a series of protocols that are put into place where if anybody has a concern with respect to actual innocence, people can bring those concerns to our office and they'll be addressed. You don't have to do it through counsel. That can be done. In fact, some of our cases that we've reviewed came to after they've been turned down by innocence commissions, after they've won, or I'm sorry, after the state has won the appeal. We've still looked at those cases, and where appropriate, I've exonerated people. In addition to that, you know, in addition to setting up the case review panel, which I don't know if my opponents looked at the media, but there's been many reports about the case review panel. There's been many articles about this. There's no secret about it. It's not a secret panel. The names of all the panelists of the case review panel, as well as the Citizens Advisory Board, have been published in numerous articles because their work is real. This isn't something that's in name only. This is real work that's been done. In addition to that, we have protocols into place, again, to address how did these cases happen and how do we prevent them from happening in the future. One of the main reasons for wrongful convictions has to do with the concept of cognitive bias or tunnel vision. And that, unfortunately, is human nature. It's something we all do. You know, very few of these cases, certainly in Lake County and beyond, have to do with prosecutors or police officers that knew they had an innocent person and wrongfully convicted them anyway. That would be easier to fix, frankly. These are situations, though, where everybody at the time really thought they had the right person and they didn't. And how do you fix that? Because that's that cognitive bias, that's that tunnel vision. And that's why I've brought in a group of people with fresh eyes, with fresh experience, that don't rely on me for a paycheck, that volunteer their time to bring that fresh set of eyes to cases where there is a concern, where there's an issue with regard to actual innocence. That panel also works with people in our office that are dedicated to work on those cases in-house, to devote their time to, in addition to their other duties, in addition to an investigator assigned to help, again, uncover these cases, find out what went wrong, and then when it comes to identification protocols, videotaping of confessions, which is something we require that's not required by law in all felony cases. Again, identification protocols, training with both prosecutors and investigators. The Sentinel review is a big part of how we work on these cases and prevent them moving forward. So there's a very serious track record of success in our office of not only talking about these issues, but dealing with them.
Mr. Rinehart, how would you do wrongful convictions differently?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, Mike, you gotta check your facts here. With respect to the wrongful conviction panel, I've had people tell me that that information can't be released on a FOIA and won't be released on a FOIA. There's a 2012 news article from the Daily Herald, thank you Daily Herald, that talks about the members of the wrongful conviction unit and the citizens panel in 2012, maybe early 2013. That was 7.5 years ago. The citizens panel is not having public meetings or public forums reaching out to the people, which is what I would do. The names of these members are not on any websites or part of any sort of transparent process. Local school councils, school boards, citizen advisory panels throughout our state and throughout our county. You know who is on these citizen and community groups, and so it's not acceptable when Mike says that this is all out in the open. There's nothing that's out in the open about this, and I would encourage the Daily Herald right after this interview. I would encourage them to submit a FOIA on this and see what the response is, and we can see if there's consistency from the state's attorney's office on this. When it comes to the wrongful conviction work, Mike has been in office for 8 years. He's spoken of 4 people that are out, and he talks about exonerating them like he made this decision. First of all, 2 of them had appeals in the works. 2 of them, one was in 15 and 17, many years after he was in office, and many years after those appeals were pending.
So Mr. Rinehart, you've made that point. What I want to know is what would you do that Mike isn't doing to handle wrongful convictions?
Absolutely. So I'd have full-time attorneys on it. Right now he has a part-time attorney and volunteer attorneys. We need to have accountability within an office where, you know, there's like supervising and like personnel reports, and we can see how many hours you're in the office. So it needs to be full-time attorneys. And frankly, with this office's history of wrongful convictions, it's going to take several full-time attorneys to sort through the mess that has been created. So that's one thing I would do. I would have my community advisory panel interfacing with my wrongful conviction unit as we review cases, and it would be as open a process as we could. There would be public meetings of both. And the other thing I would do is I would make personnel changes. And if you were an attorney that was advocating for the conviction of Jerry Hobbs or Juan Rivera, you're probably not going to be supervising people and training people in our office anymore. And it's just not accurate. And please review the media articles on this. When Mike says that those prosecutors thought that Jerry Hobbs was guilty and they were making kind of an honest and reasonable mistake, they knew in 2008 that DNA didn't match. And they kept him in until 2010. And I'd ask anybody who's listening to this or who's on this panel today to think about being away from your family after you've lost your daughter, after you've lost already 3 years of your life, and to sit for another 2 years after the DNA did not match. What Mike is saying is just not accurate. It's not right to say that it's just tunnel vision. If it was just tunnel vision and reasonable mistakes, then the county and the taxpayers wouldn't have paid out $54 million already. Why are we paying out if it's all reasonable mistakes, Mike? We're paying out because they were terrible mistakes, because they were egregious injustices. So, Mr. Nenny, the first thing we have to do is change the culture. And I don't mean to, you have to change the culture by changing the people in there and by saying you're going to break from the past. We need to have a public report about why those cases happened. For the first time today, Mike says, well, we're going to talk about why these things happened. It's been 8 years. Where is this public report or this Sentinel report that describes those 7 injustices? How can we learn from something if we don't have a public report talking about why it happened? We're going to have a public report, we're going to have full-time attorneys, and we're going to listen to the people and have public meetings about this so that we get to the bottom of this, and we're going to change the personnel that cause these problems.
Mike, do you want to respond?
Look, there's personnel that were involved in those cases that are no longer in the office. There's personnel that were involved in those cases in some regards that still are. My chief deputy, Jeff Pavletic, I regard as one of the most highly regarded prosecutors in the state and beyond. He trains people all over the country. Mistakes were made historically, and these were injustices, but they were not intentional. If anybody in my office did something intentional to cause a wrongful conviction, they'd be gone. There was one case, for example, Mr. Gonzalez, Angel Gonzalez, the prosecutor that originally prosecuted that case, is still in my office and was actually instrumental in working towards that exoneration. That's a case that did involve tunnel vision, did involve retesting DNA, which is something else that we put into place in our office, knowing how the science of DNA has evolved over the years. We have a standard policy in our office that if somebody wants to retest DNA on an old case, we don't object. We agree to that, and hopefully those results will show that the person that was convicted was in fact the right person. But if they don't, and it shows in the case of Mr. Gonzalez that it was the wrong person, we're going to act. And I acted on that case as I did the 3 others. Those were my decisions. It didn't matter that they had pending appeals. If I see somebody that I think was wrongfully convicted, I'm going to take action. I'm not going to wait for an appellate process to resolve itself. We will take action, which I have. Mr. Gonzalez's case is also an example of a case where he had appealed. He had requested DNA to be retested. A prior administration in my office declined to agree to retest that DNA. It was ordered by the court. That test result was inconclusive. The defense came to me when I was elected and asked me to retest it again. I certainly agreed because that's my policy. And it did show, because the science of DNA had evolved so much in that period of time. Now we had conclusive results that this person was in fact innocent. And that's a decision I made. And Mr. Gonzalez is free today because, again, I'm not somebody that just talks about these issues. I've actually acted upon them. When I ran for this office in 2012, I told you and the Tribune and everybody else in Lake County that I was asking to support me, that I would take on the issue of wrongful convictions, and I have. And my record is firm.
Mr. Rinehart, you say that the state's attorney's office has never worked with community leaders in an effective way to address the underlying causes of gang violence or used violence interrupters. You promised to form a violent crime task force to work with law enforcement, church leaders, and community groups to get to the heart of the problems. What specific gains do you see coming from such an approach?
Gains?
Yes.
Yeah, great question. So that's a little bit about what I'm talking about both transparency and restoring the trust. If you bring more people into the process of identifying the gangs and identifying the friction points and the possible causes of conflict, if you go into going deeply into the neighborhoods, the violence interrupter programs have reduced crime a great deal throughout the country wherever they've been supported. They have not been supported by this office. There need to be programs where the violence interrupters are actually in the streets right away. We need to support those types of nonprofits. We need to have more and more forums with the people. We need to have open forums with the people and the church leaders and the business leaders and law enforcement, and try to get our head around why these shootings are happening, why shootings have been up over the last 8 years. And I think that has to be one of our first steps so that we make this a real community effort to reduce the violent crime. And if we have more people buy in, if we have more people trust that the state's attorney's office is going to hear them, and care about victims of all colors, from all backgrounds, if we go out there and meet with more people as the office and connecting through this task force, then it will work. And I think people will understand that their state's attorney's office is open and wants to work on this problem. So I think that would have enormous gains, and we would be able to reduce the violence.
Mr. Nerheim, in your questionnaire, you say you've worked with the U.S. Office of National Drug Control Policy to obtain high-intensive drug trafficking area designation for Lake County, which brings resources to aid in the fight against gang and gun violence. Has that resulted in any concrete gains in addressing the county's gang problem, and if so, what?
Well, not yet, because we just started. This was a several-year process where we've been working to be included as a HIDA designee county. Lake County was the one county that historically was not part of Chicago HIDA. DuPage County, Cook County, Kane County, Will County, all those other counties were, and we were sort of the missing link in between Chicago and Kenosha. Attempts had been made as far back as 20 years to be included in the Chicago HIDA. This was a priority of mine that I've been working on for a couple of years. And thankfully, because of our relationship with the Office of Drug Control Policy, we were accepted this year. We had our first meeting, actually yesterday was the first meeting, but more importantly, funds will continue to now flow to Lake County for a variety of resources, both in terms of crime analyst support. So we have intel resources. We have law enforcement resources that are going to be diverted to Lake County through the FBI, the ATF, the DEA, to supplement the Sheriff's Office task force that currently is operating in Lake County, that we also support through personnel. But this will also, in addition to the enforcement aspect, because HIDA is not all about enforcement. Another important part of HIDA is in terms of reduction of demand for drugs. And that has to do with education with youth, education with regard to the community and outreach into the community to help people struggling with addiction get help, to help educate youth so they don't go down that road in the first place. So again, you have both the supply and demand angle that has always been my focus when it comes to gangs and drugs, which is why we've, in addition to our aggressively prosecuting street gangs, on the other side, we've implemented programs to try to reduce the demand for drugs in our community in a holistic way. Our Way Out program, for example, is a program that we created that is a cutting edge program that's designed to help people struggling with addiction get the help that they need without getting arrested. And they get the help that they need through the police. All somebody has to do is go into a police station and say, I'm here for help. If they want to turn in their drugs, they can. Those drugs are taken and destroyed. Those people are not arrested. It's completely a voluntary program. And over 700 people in our community have gotten access to treatment through the police through this program. And that program continues to grow here in Lake County. Now, that's important because not only have 700 people gotten access to treatment and diverted away from the criminal justice system, but what that does is it gets people in the using community to look at police in a different way. Now as a source of help, as a source of support, which is contrast with how they traditionally would have viewed the police. And it also gets the police looking at the using community in a different way as well. It gets them to see their role as it relates to this population, regardless of where these people are from, regardless of what their resources are, that this is a population that's there for them to help. And that helps build trust between the community and law enforcement and helps rebuild those bridges so we can continue to get more support from our community. So that HIDA designation, again, it's brand new. It just happened. That's going to bode well for us in the future. But these initiatives in terms of the combating both supply and demand and being compassionate and aggressive, that's been our practice all along and will continue to be our practice.
Okay, Mr. Nerheim, there's a national debate on systemic racism. Is racism so embedded in our police in Lake County, there's a need for major reform? Explain one concrete step you would take as state's attorney to improve the relationship between law enforcement and minority communities in the county.
So racism, there's certainly systemic racism, not just in the criminal justice system, but in our entire country. And this goes back for generations. So the results of that we see in our criminal justice system. So there absolutely has to be further work done to help rebuild those bridges. The Way Out program, which I just identified, is one of those programs. The training that we support, whether it's implicit bias, whether it's cynicism, cultural awareness, not only for the police, but for our staff, is important. But really the most important part of this is accountability, making sure that when police officers break the law, that they are held accountable. And the public needs to see that. They need to know that the police are held to the same standard as anybody else. And my office has a track record of actually doing that. We've prosecuted police officers for various crimes here in Lake County. We're currently prosecuting police officers here in Lake County when they break the law. The little bit trickier challenge to fix, and this is something I'm working on currently, has to do with situations where officers, it's not, the cases where officers are arrested and charged with crimes, those are easy to fix. It's the cases that kind of fly under the radar that we don't know about, where if an officer does some form of misconduct and their administration is unwilling or unable to appropriately address that conduct, or sometimes what we see happen far too late in the game is when situations arise, the chief goes to address that officer, and rather than face discipline, the officer quits and goes to work somewhere else, and we never know about it. That's not only in Lake County, but across the country, the issue that really needs to be addressed is how do we address appropriately these problem officers where that information does not get to the state's attorney. And I think personally the best way to do that is through the concept of police licensure. And that's something that I've been working on here in Lake County and working with the Attorney General and a small group of law enforcement leaders across the state to actually implement. What police licensure would do is it would actually create a separate layer of review for police misconduct. There would be a separate body, a statewide agency that would oversee the conduct of police officers, similar to what we have as attorneys with the ARDC, the Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission. As attorneys, if, for example, we break the law, we're subject to prosecution, we're subject to discipline from our employers, but we're also subject to discipline from the ARDC, independent of whether we're prosecuted or independent of whether any action is taken on us by our employer. That this would be a similar model. So police officers, like many professions in Illinois, hairdressers, physicians, doctors, they would have to be licensed, and that they would have a code of conduct by which they would all have to abide by that would deal with ethical conduct. We would also increase the crimes with, currently there's a list of offenses that if an officer is convicted of one of those offenses, they lose their ability to become a police officer. That list of offenses needs to be expanded, but we also need to create this code of conduct and have this licensing body that would allow both police administrators, prosecutors, and the public to go to somebody, an agency, to report allegations of misconduct that could be independently investigated and then acted upon. So now you have these problem officers that can't just simply go and become a police officer somewhere else and fly under the radar. These officers would be accountable to this licensing body and could face discipline up to and including losing their license to become police officers. So that's something concrete that is underway as we speak.
Ms. Rinehart, same question. Do you need me to repeat it?
No, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nerheim. Mike is talking about something that he has taught, that he is saying in the future, we're going to have a licensure program in order to figure out where the officers are moving to. There was misconduct. There has been misconduct identified by judges for years in this courthouse. And I'd ask the members of the board just to think about this for a moment. I'm sorry that this is a little bit of a longer answer, but this is really, really important. Mike has made this a mysterious process and a licensure, and that officers are able to evade discipline or scrutiny because it's stuck in personnel records or personnel procedures within the municipalities. Once or twice a month, a felony judge decides whether or not the Constitution was violated in a public courtroom. I'm going to say it again. Once or twice a month, a felony judge who we have elected and retained, and the the top legal minds in our county, in terms of experience, in terms of intelligence, in terms of trust, make a decision on something called motions to suppress. This is a public hearing. It is not a mystical or mystified example of misconduct. They are examples of where the Constitution has been violated. That needs to all be dealt with in the state's attorney's office. It needs to be transparent when an officer has violated the Constitution. That is a public document, that is a public record, and we need to be transparent about it. And officers don't get away from it because they change jobs. And so when those judges are making final rulings, Mike talks about accountability and how he says that there has been accountability within his office. The same officers who took false confessions in those other cases are still here. And I'm not beating a dead horse because the officers are here today. I'm not saying they were here too long and Mike got rid of them, Mike stopped using them eventually, or that Mike disciplined them eventually. I'm saying they're here today on September 9th. The officers who were named in the lawsuit and liable to the point that settlements were paid in the millions of dollars are still involved in murder investigations and felony investigations in this courthouse. So when Mike says that there has to be a licensure program so that some state panel can bring in discipline, we need accountability right here. We need local accountability here with names we know, with names like Eric Rinehart, with names from our judges in terms of finding these, in terms of finding the bad actors, not some panel that Mike doesn't even know when it's going to be put in place. Is it going to be another 2 years of police misconduct before your licensure program, Mike? The state's attorney's office is the first line of defense when it comes to constitutional violations. And frankly, the office right now, the state's attorney's office right now, doesn't want to hear about constitutional violations on day one in a place called bond court. And that's what they say, Mike. That's what they say on a daily basis. I don't want to talk about the Fourth Amendment issues now. Deal with it upstairs. The state's attorney's office is the first line of defense in this, and there is already procedures in place from misdemeanor and felony and traffic judges who describe these constitutional violations. So there's at least those violations are not being evaded. We need to have a community panel where people can bring these concerns directly to the community panel, bypassing, and this is in my plan that I've laid out on my website, bypassing the concerns about human resource problems or personnel problems. Let's just get to the root of the problem. And the state's attorney's office has unbelievable discretion when it comes to rooting out racial profiling from officers. They can dismiss cases on the front end rather than waiting for some licensure program that Mike's talking about years into the future. That's not, we don't even know when that's going to come into being, when this office has so much power now to root it out. We need to increase implicit bias training. The office is doing about 1/8 of what it should be doing. We need to increase our implicit bias training and from the 12% level now and go all the way up to 100%. We need to have more lawyers of color in the office to reflect our diverse community right now. There are not enough lawyers of color in his office, and he has struggled with that, and he has admitted that in interviews. And so we need to do so much more, and we need to create real accountability. Instead of talking about far-off plans, we can have and will have, when I win, accountability right here in the courthouse after these judges make these decisions and after people in the community bring them to my transparent community panel.
Okay, we're out of time. I appreciate the time that you guys have made for us and the wide-ranging and open discussion that we've had. Diane, anything that you wanted to add?
No, and thank you for coming.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Diane.
All right, you guys have a great day, and that concludes today's interview. I want to thank Mr. Nerheim, Mr. Rinehart for their time and their participation. Good luck on your campaigns. The election is November 3rd. Early voting begins September 24th. That will include mail-in voting this year. We encourage all voters to research the candidates and the issues in all the races, and to make use of the Daily Herald and dailyherald.com as part of that research. Ultimately, informing voting is one of the most sacred obligations a citizen has if a democracy is to flourish. Thank you for watching, and stay well.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Nerheim.
Bye.